In front of me are three notable Nikon Z-system cameras. Flagship camera Nikon Z9, professional grade camera. Nikon Z6II, which recording me right now, and camera to capture hearts of enthusiasts, Nikon Zf. I reviewed these three cameras and its various aspects of these cameras on my channel, and I frequently get asked, what cameras should I get out of these three, or should I wait for Nikon Z6III? I recognize that I no longer can ignore all these questions. I decided to make this video to share my viewpoint, what I expect from Nikon Z6III will consist of, and its projected price point at its release date. Now, I have to say with full disclosure, I don't have a crystal ball and I cannot say with certainty what Nikon Z6III will be like. But what I can say with certainty is that Nikon Z6III is going to be an epic professional camera. So please grab a cup of coffee and let's go through this together. In order for me to intelligently answer the question, what do I expect from Nikon Z6III? We have to wear two different hats. One, we have to look from the viewpoint of an engineer, which I am in my everyday life. And the second one is that from the viewpoint of a market analyst. I paid full price for all of these three cameras. I'm not a Nikon fanboy. I just like the system. I love the results that it delivers. I like the build quality. I like the support and firmware upgrades that Nikon provides, and I like forward-thinking approach that Nikon has been taking for the past 5 years. So to start asking this question of what to expect from Nikon Z6III, let's take a walk down a memory lane of Nikon Z-system and establish a baseline. If you're familiar with Nikon Z-system cameras, you probably know the timeline, but I think let's take a look at the sequence of the camera releases and what we have seen. So we know that Nikon Z6 and Nikon Z7 were released in around November 2018. And I know there was an announcement dates prior to that, but I think I'm just going to focus on the release dates. And these two cameras were released with an XP6 processor. Z6II was a 24 megapixel camera sensor and Z7 was a 45. Now both cameras had a single CF Express card / XQD. We had both mechanical shutters, 4K videos. The cameras have mini HDMIs. Now there are many other aspects to mention these cameras, but I just want to kind of focus on this really high level of what people are usually looking for. And the price point at which Nikon Z6II was released was $1999 and Nikon Z7 was at $3,400. Now these are all in the US dollars. Now if you're in a different country, you may need to change to your current currency. Now let's take a look at Nikon Z6II. Now, the release date for this camera was November 2020, which is virtually 2 years after Nikon Z6. And Nikon Z7 was released about the same time. We also had a 24 megapixel sensor for Nikon Z6II, and Z7 II had a 45 megapixel sensor. Now, what we got this time around, we got two cards slots. One's for CF Express / XQD, and the second one was for the SD card. And this is actually the time when I decided to switch fully to mirrorless Z-system camera, and I purchased at the time Nikon Z6II. We also had a 4K video, we had a mechanical shutter, we also have an electronic shutter at this point, we have mini HDMI, and again, the price point for these for Nikon Z6II was $1999, which is virtually the same body, just some minor variances. Plus, we have two card slots, and Nikon Z7 II was released at $3,000. As you can see, there's a price reduction for the Z7 II, but we have a dual XP6 processor, which I know it's kind of questionable. Many people even wonder what's the point of two processors when we didn't get as many firmware updates as some people expected, but nonetheless we did get dual XP6 processors. Moving forward, now this is where really the camera market was taken by the storm of Nikon Z9, which was released in December 2021. I personally purchased the Z9 in January of 2022. And at this time, we have an X-Speed 7 processor, which supposedly is actually 10 times as fast as the dual X-Speed 6 processor. We have a stacked 45 megapixel sensor, which is one of the kind of first ones on the market at this point, which only has an electronic shutter. At this point, we don't have any mechanical shutter in the Nikon Z9. We did get dual card slots, and in this case was CF Express XQD cards for both slots. We also get an 8K video, which was super amazing for this camera grade. H.265, 422 ProRes RAW, 422 HQ, RAW 12-bit. I mean, it was really a whole slew of amazing specifications built in this camera. 4K 120, HDMI, full-size HDMI, up to 120 frames per second shooting. Yes, it was in JPEGs, but it was enough for literally 99% of people. And what was the amazing price about this camera is that it was released at $5,500. It's really unheard of for Nikon camera systems to really set that price point for a flagship camera. So from this point on, really the Nikon cameras starting really we start seeing the upward trend when it comes to quality. And what Nikon is doing here from the point of Nikon Z9 is that every time we have a camera release, we have a wow moment. And I think this is what Nikon is going for next. So many of us wanted to see a replacement for D850. So Nikon released a Nikon Z8, which is virtually a baby Z9 with the 45 megapixel, the same stack sensor. We have two card slots, except this one was CF Express and the second one was for the SD cards. We still have 8K video. We have H.265, 422, ProRes 422 HQ, RAW 12-bit, 4K 120 frames per second. We still have a full-size HDMI, and we have up to 120 frames per second. And again, what's the wow moment here is that camera is significantly less, which is $4,000, but virtually delivers most of what Nikon Z9 was providing to us, and still with an X-Speed 7 processor. Moving forward, in 2023 in October, Nikon released a Nikon Zf, which is camera for enthusiasts, but with professional specifications inside of it. We have a 24 megapixel sensor, the same one that we got in Nikon Z6II. We do have two card slots, one for the SD card and the second one for micro SD. We have 4K 30p video, H.265 10-bit, and we have a 96 megapixel high-res images because of the technology that's now in Nikon Zf. We have a very angled screen. Basically, it's a fully articulated screen as opposed to all the prior cameras that we've had here. We do have a micro HDMI. And why Nikon did all this here, right? It's as far as the technology goes, if you look at the trend for Nikon Z6 when it was released in November 2018, Nikon Z6II in November 2020. Now, what we should be expecting in October 2023, it really should be Nikon Z6III. But no, that's not what Nikon did. They gave us a Nikon Zf, which is still amazing. When it comes to specification, this might as well could be Nikon Z6III. However, Nikon decided to hold off and gave us really a warming welcome into their system, especially to those who like the retro cameras. So again, another wow moment for Nikon at $19.99 for Nikon Zf. So what's going to be happening now actually with Nikon Z6III? I think the bar is raised at this point, and what I believe Nikon is going to give us another wow moment. But before we do discuss the price and what's going to be when it comes to specifications, let's look at today's competition at what Nikon is actually looking at. So the first one I really want to mention is Sony A7 IV that was released at $24.99 and which was released in October of 2021. That camera has a 33 megapixel sensor. We have a BSI CMOS sensor, 4K 60 in Super 35 mode. It is a 4K oversampled from 7K. Now we see number of Ks now is actually increasing here. We still have, well, we have a 10 frames per second in mechanical shutter. We do have a dual SD cards, which are CF Express Type A, and we also have a very angle tilting screen, which I have to admit, someone who really likes Nikon Z-system cameras in its ergonomics and handling and screens, I do prefer personally having a very angled screen and tilting of the Sony A7 IV. Another camera that I think is a competitor to Nikon Z6III, at least from the on paper, is Canon R6 II, which also was released at $24.99 in November of 2022. With this camera, we have a 24 megapixels CMOS sensor. It's a 4K 60 10-bit internal recording, which is awesome. We have external 6K ProRes recording RAW, and we have a 12 frames per second mechanical shutter and up to 40 frames per second electronic shutter. We have a dual UHS-2 SD cards. We have a very angled screen, just like on previous Canon cameras. We have micro HDMI, and we get a Canon Log 3. And I know I'm not listing all the specifications in this camera. There's just too many to go through. But this is really a high-level overview of what these cameras present. And one other camera that I feel like I really don't want to overlook, and maybe there's some other ones, but I think this one really fits within this bracket here, is the Panasonic Lumix S5 II, because of this improved autofocus system, which was released in January 2023, virtually a year ago. We have a 24 megapixel sensor, it's 422, 10-bit, 12-bit via HDMI, 6K 30. So you can see the competition, right? We have a not only just 4K, but we have a 6K, 7K when it comes to being oversampled to 4K. For the Sony A7 IV, we have up to 9 frames mechanical shutter, up to 30 frames in electronic shutter. We have a very angled screen. We have another 96 megapixels pixel shift technology here. We have a dual SD cards. We have full-size HDMI. So that's the competition that I think that Nikon Z6III is going up against. And maybe there are some other cameras. Please comment in the description box below that you think that Nikon Z6III will be competing against. So now let's go back to kind of our timeline of Nikon Z cameras, and I recognize there are other full frame cameras that Nikon released since that point, but I'm not going kind of to compare this. There's just too much to go through, but I think these are the primary cameras that kind of we see the growth and projection towards Nikon Z6III. So what do we have for Nikon Z6III and when it's going to be released? Now let's start with this. There is a possibility that Nikon may give us a dual XP7 processor. I do firmly believe that looking at all the previous processors for the past 3 cameras, we had XP7 processor, which is amazing. I think Nikon is going to implement this in the Z6III. Is it going to be dual? Maybe, maybe not. I kind of doubt it because it's really a single processor is already enough to manage the technology of the Nikon Z9, Nikon Z8. Now, I do fully expect that this is probably going to be a 33 megapixel sensor, similar to what we have in Sony A7 IV. I think it's going to be dual card slots, which I'm pretty sure Nikon is not going to give us less than they gave us in the Z6II, which is the CF Express card / XQD and one SD card. It's going to be a professional grade camera. So based on where number of the resolution quantities we're talking about here, I think it's going to be 6K 30 video recording in Nikon Z6III. We're going to get ProRes RAW, possibly externally. Okay, I don't know if it's going to be internally, but we will get a 4K 60 and most likely probably the same limit, 125 minutes time recording limit. There will be 4K 120 N-Log H.265 10-bit. Again, some of this will be carried over into from the previous cameras. I think we're gonna inherit most likely the new updated mechanical shutter and improved IBIS from the ZF, and we're gonna have up to 14 frames per second. I think it's going to be 96 megapixel high resolution images we're going to be able to produce as well. It is probably going to be very angle screen, just like what we have on a Nikon ZF. I would be very surprised, pleasantly surprised, if we were to get one of those that we have on the Sony a7 IV, but I'm wondering if that one is a patent at this point. Now, if we're going to get a full-size HDMI, which I think most people would prefer, I think it's going to be a newer body, because they will not be able to fit physically a larger HDMI port in the same camera body as what we have seen with Nikon Z6 and Z6II. And I think really overall it might have a new form factor, which would be something similar between Nikon Z6II and Nikon Z8. That will be a very welcome addition to the camera systems. I think it's going to be really epic, amazing when it comes to that. Now let's talk about the projected cost. I think if it's going to be still 24 megapixel sensor, it's probably going to be $19.99, and Nikon will maintain that cost when it comes to what they started with Nikon Z6. Again, I think Nikon is going for another wow moment, and I think that would be it. If it's 33 megapixel sensor, I believe and I think that Nikon, they would not exceed the $2,500 US dollars price point. But who knows? They might give us a 33 megapixel sensor for the same price, basically of $19.99. But I guess this is what I really expect moving forward, based on the competition and based on the previous Nikon Z cameras that they released, especially Nikon Z6, Z6II, and Nikon Zf. I think these are kind of the benchmarks that we're going off. And now, would there be Nikon Z7III? I don't know, but I think if there will be one, and Nikon is making a room for that, I think it's going to be 60-ish megapixel sensor, and I think the price point of this camera is going to be $3,000 to maybe $3,400. We will see. Again, I have no crystal ball, but I think if I was working on Nikon's marketing team and just comparing competition, looking at what we have, I think this is where we really would end up. So these are my thoughts about Nikon Z6III, guys. Please let me know what you personally think Nikon Z6III is gonna look like, consist of. Did I miss it somewhere? Maybe I did. Again, I don't claim I have all the answers, but this is what I personally fully expect from the Nikon Z6 Mark III camera. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and so that I can make more videos like this for viewers like you. Thank you.